The lesson we're going to talk about, the Lord kind of put this together 15 years ago when I was getting some tires changed, tires and actually wheels on a car. And I went and picked up the car, and one of the tires was flat. And I said to the folks, I don't think we're quite done yet. And so I went out in the car, and Sister Karen and I had a little Bible study, and a few things came together. And I had the, like Brother Homer had said, I had an aha moment where the Lord says, here's how this should be put together. So we want to share that. And I've given this talk before, but seeing that what the focus of this convention is about, I think this is especially relevant to the idea of really dedicating ourselves to be faithful to our consecration, no matter what. So what we want to do is talk about our responsibilities as new creatures with respect to developing the likeness of God's dear Son in us, that the righteousness of Christ, the righteousness of the law may be fulfilled in us if we walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Rather than this is a long walk. That's a long walk. If you look at mankind, they've been walking in the wrong direction for over 6,000 years. From the time of Adam in Genesis, the other end, 2:17, God said, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shouldn't eat it, for when you do, in that day you'll die. Well, in Genesis 3:6, we know that Eve took of the fruit and ate, gave it to her husband, Adam, he ate, and mankind has been eating ever since, mainly of the evil part. Now notice, Adam and Eve didn't have the knowledge of good and evil at that point, but they were going to have the experience, which was going to give them that knowledge, because experience is the proof. You have the experience. God doesn't say, take my word for it. He said, I'm going to give you the experience, let you see for yourself. But so mankind's been eating most of this evil part, but we have to commit ourselves to walk in the right direction, absolutely as much as possible right now, even while the wrong influences are all around us, pressuring us to be like them. Now, it will be very different for the world in the future, because you see, as you know, they don't have the affinity for righteousness that we must have now. So in the future, the mediatorial phase of the kingdom, all the bad influences will be removed. They're going to have a wonderful environment. Isaiah 35:8. And a highway shall be there, and a way. It'll be the way of holiness. In Isaiah 35:9, no lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast. It won't be found there, because God's plan is for the Christ-head and body to give mankind this wonderful environment where they're going to learn things that right now they don't even want to learn. But we, on the other hand, must achieve perfection of our character right now with opposing influences all around us. And we must be able to discern the right things and recognize the wrong things and know what to do about it, know what to do with them. That's our responsibility. We have to be able to understand these things. Our Father wants the very best for us. He wants us to understand exactly what is the very best for us, and for us to desire the good and reject the bad. But we're in these earthen vessels, these bodies which have an inherent affinity for things that gratify the flesh, rather than the new creature. And these are not necessarily evil things. We talked about that the other evening. But even good things can take up our time, our talents, our resources, and end up defocusing us from the goal. And as long as the adversary can do that, he says, hey, I'm happy. I don't need to kill you. I'm just going to attack your focus, your ideology, have you go do something else. You will fail, perhaps die forever, and the adversary will walk away laughing. So we also want to keep in mind that Jesus, when he made his consecration, He consecrated to sacrifice the will of even a perfect human being to do God's will. Jesus had to go through many experiences which would crystallize his perfect character. He learned obedience. Really, I think, Brother Homer mentioned, I think he learned really the cost of obedience by how important that obedience is. And brethren, when you want something and you pay for it and it costs you something, now you value it. A lot of times somebody just gives you something, costs you nothing. You don't value it the way you should. I mean, that's just tendency. So when we do something and it costs us a lot, we treasure it. We treasure it. And when our obedience and our sacrifice costs us a lot, it shows us how dedicated we are. We're showing to ourselves, I'm never giving this up. Look at all I've spent on this. I'm never giving this up. Well, Jesus started out perfect. We, on the other hand, must first develop and establish that perfect character before it can be fully tested, before it can be crystallized and perfected. Perfected the other side of the veil. Well, how do we do this? Well, part of the answer is the story of the wood chips and the apples. You may be familiar with this. Little boy, he was getting into trouble. He was getting bad grades in school. He was hanging out with the wrong kids. He's doing all these things, wasting his time. But his conscience was getting to him. He says, Dad, I know I'm messing up. I should do better. And his dad says, well, here's a lesson for you. I want you to go out to the back of the shed. There's a basket there, and fill it full of wood chips. So he did. And then his father said, okay, now that it's full of wood chips, fill it full of apples. And the little boy says, well, I can't. It's full of wood chips. He said, that's right. You've got to dump out the wood chips before you can put the apples in. So get rid of all the bad tendencies. Find where the wood chips, get rid of all the bad tendencies in your life, and then make sure you're filling things with good tendencies. That's for a little child, but that was a wonderful thing for us. Now, anyone of any maturity, hopefully that's everybody in this room and everybody online, they know that they are gradually changed by the influences that affect them. So over time, those influences will change us. We'll become somebody else. But we have the chance to choose those influences under which we place ourselves before that change takes place. So we have to choose wisely. If you want to become a doctor, what do? Well, you put yourself under the influence of a medical school, and after time, gee whiz, you'll be a doctor. You want to become a musician? Well, you put you're under the influence of musical training and other musicians. But if you hang around with criminals and thieves, what'll happen? Well, guess what? You'll probably become a criminal and a thief because it's the wrong influence. People know that. Some folks make mistakes, they go to prison. I mean, they made a mistake. They go to prison and they learn how to be a criminal. When they're worse when they come out because of all the influence in there. Well, this is why this idea of influence, this is why parents want the very best influences to affect their children, and they want to keep away the bad influences. How many parents are in the room here? Would you ever want your kids to be around other kids who are going to steal and swear and, cut class and all that? Anybody want that for their kids? Please raise. No, of course not. You want only the best things for your children because they're so impressionable. And I have stories I don't have time to talk about. Something like that happened to me when I was a kid one day. Anyway. Well, right now, we'd like to look further at this lesson with respect to influences in our lives as new creatures and how they can affect us and change us. Now, God was very specific when how he views wrong influences in the lives of his people. He absolutely abhors them. He wants us to view things from his standpoint and to develop his ability to recognize the wrong influences and eliminate from our lives as much as possible. Brethren, as we know, we are on a life and death mission. We can take no prisoners, we can harbor no enemies in our character, and we must be successful. But here's a question. What if we find after years, we find out we've failed along some line? There's something that's been influencing us and it's leading us the wrong way, and we find it in our character. There's a flaw there. Then what? Is all lost? Do we give up? Do we stop and declare the defeat? Do we, like go to the back of the boat, grab the anchor and jump overboard with it? Can anything be done? Well, our loving Heavenly Father, in his mercy and his justice, he has laid this out for us. What can be done? And that's our lesson today. Well, if we go back to Exodus, this is before Israel's even come out of Egypt. God said to Moses, and when you go into Pharaoh, tell him this: Israel is my son, even my firstborn. That is a profound statement. This meant that God would nurture Israel, now not those individuals there, but it would be through a heritage of centuries and generations to prepare them to eventually have the absolute best that the Father can give. And what is that? That's to have the firstborn portion. He was preparing them to become the bride of Christ over 1,600 years later when Jesus was on the scene, so they could transfer from Moses to Christ and be this firstborn that he wants as part of his divine family. That's what he was preparing them for. It would take generations and generations. Well, how would God do this? Well, after the deliverance from Egypt, the law was given. What's the first? So in Exodus 20, verse 3, it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Why is that? We'll talk about that in a second. "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God." Now this is Exodus 20, verses 3 through 5. He's a jealous God. Well, I like it as a zealous God. Zealous. He's zealous. He is committed to the welfare of his people. Absolutely, just like the parents. You parents, you're absolutely committed to the welfare of your children. You are zealous. You are dedicated to everything that's going to be good for them. Also in Exodus 20:23, not only said you'll have no other gods, but it says, Exodus 20:23, you'll not make gods out of gold or silver. You'll make no gods out of gold. Well, so what happens? In Exodus 24, they say, all these things will we do. They say it twice, all these things will we do in obedient. And really from Exodus 19 to 24, these are all the laws about morality, interactions of people, property, things like that. But it wasn't really about the later law that was given was about the ceremonial law. But everything about how they should react and with each other, how they should respect God, was given to them by Exodus 24. And they said, all these things that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Absolutely, we will do. Well, Moses goes up for the ceremonial law, and in Exodus 32, Israel says to Aaron, make us gods. My word, have they forgotten what they just committed to? We don't know what happened to Moses. Maybe he's gone. Maybe he's dead. So Aaron says, all right, well, you know where they got the gold for the golden image? He says, break off the golden earrings. That's the only gold that's mentioned. Pictures our hearing ear. If you want to make an idol of something, you're going to venerate something other than the Heavenly Father, just break off your hearing ear because you don't need it anymore. You're not using it. You're not interested. Break off your hearing ear, bring it to me. So they made a golden calf and said, these be thy gods. And unfortunately, brethren can actually do that. They can have things that actually takes their attention away so much that becomes their God instead of Jehovah. Well, they didn't get it about the first commandment. Any other God is an abomination. Any influence that would detract them from the veneration of the one true God can only hurt them. It'll lead them in the wrong direction. It couldn't possibly help them. I mean, how could they ever learn righteousness without respect for the one true source of all righteousness? It's impossible. So when we get down to Exodus 32, Moses comes down the mount. God is the one who said, hey, they're committing a big sin here. Moses said, who is on the Lord's side? The sons of Levi come. We know what happens there. Take their swords. And in Exodus 32:27, now note this carefully, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man on his sword, go and slay. And there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. Israel really had no idea how serious God was about this covenant. Really, for Israel's welfare, it wasn't hurting God. It was hurting his children, who he was developing. God was showing that there is no greater sin in Israel than breaking the first commandment. Note that God was doing the punishing and he was doing the correcting. And one of the things we want to note as we go through the lesson is note who is doing the punishing, who is doing the correcting, who is taking responsibility for doing the correcting? Who is taking the responsibility? Well, Israel was still thinking like Egyptians, and it would take many hard lessons for them to trust God and to seek the righteousness that God was teaching them. God wanted Israel to learn righteousness. Now that's hard enough with Israel's undivided attention. Now, I don't know how many of you have done teaching. I've done some. I think Brother Homer's done some. Any of you have done teaching, every teacher knows it's hard enough to get a lesson across even when you have the students' full attention. But if you don't even have their attention, hey, it's a lost cause. Now for parents, it's a little different because you're with those kids, for 18 years or more. So they may not get it this year, that year, but you're still with them. But teachers realize, I need your full attention. Get rid of your cell phones, get rid of, don't pass notes in class, do it, all this other junk. Pay attention to the lesson. Well, God wanted Israel to learn righteousness, and he wanted their undivided attention. But it would be impossible if they allowed pagan influences to distract them and lead them away. Well, in Exodus 23:31, and 32, Exodus 23:31 and 32, he says, I will deliver the inhabitants of the land that they're going into. I mean, we haven't gotten to Kadesh Barnea yet. He says, I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand. So drive, and thou shalt drive them out before thee. Get rid of all these pagans. They're going to corrupt you. Make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in the land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare. We talked about a snare the other night, unto thee. Or take their daughters unto thy sons, and make thy sons go a whoring. Now note it doesn't say, this is Exodus 34:16, not a whoring after their women, but it says, make their sons go a whoring after their gods. Really, Israel's supposed to be, in a sense, married to Jehovah. But if they do this, they're going a whoring after these pagan gods. Well, later Israel fails a big test at Kadesh Barnea. They wouldn't go into the land, and keep in mind that phrase, going into the land. What does that really mean? We'll talk about that a little later. They wouldn't go into the land because they thought the enemies were too strong for them. The spies gave an evil report, and their refusal to trust God in the entering into the land. Now, so God says, all right, all the adults, guess what? You're all going to die in the desert, every single one of you, other than Caleb and Joshua, because they were still thinking like Egyptians. And really a side lesson is mankind can't can't slay the Canaanites, the enemies in their character, with the law. It's got to be under Christ. It's got to be under Christ. We'll come back to this. So for the next 39 years, the parents are going to die, and the younger generation is going to see how serious God is about this covenant. Well, as they're going through, King Balak sees these hordes of Israel near his land. He tries to get the pagan prophet Balaam to curse Israel, but Balaam can't do it. All he can do is repeat the blessings that God wants him to give to Israel. So King Balak's getting upset, and Balaam's not going to get paid for his services. So he thinks, what to do. Okay, well, Balaam thinks, well, I can't separate God from Israel, but I could separate Israel from God. How? Through evil influences. So he says, we'll just make Israel lust after the Moabite women. So Numbers 25, 1 through 4, Numbers 25, 1 through 4. Israel's at Shittim. The people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. They called, and the Israelites were called to the sacrifices. They bowed down to these pagan gods. Numbers 25:3, it's very important, a phrase here. It says, and Israel joined himself. Notice Israel was treated as one person. Israel joined himself. It's like it's only one person that's being talked about here. The entire nation of over 1 million people is being considered by God as one. Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled. The Lord said to Moses, take the heads of the people, execute them in broad daylight, hang them up. And they slew 24,000 men. And this is where Phinehas throws a javelin through an Israelite and a Moabite woman, just to literally make a point, no pun intended there. But so 24,000 were killed. But who's the one who's really doing this? Who's the one who's giving the command? Who was really instigating this punishment and the correction? It was God himself. It wasn't Israel. They weren't mature enough to do that. So Israel had to pay a terrible personal cost to learn this lesson. Phinehas took immediate action and stayed God's wrath. But note again, at this point in Israel's development, the largest action was done by God himself in this plague or slaughter, if you will. Well, years later, Moses, this is his swan song in Deuteronomy. And I want to read, in Deuteronomy 7:1, he says, when you come into the land, you should cast out the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And he says, you shall smite them and utterly destroy them, make no covenant, don't show mercy, neither make any marriages, for they will turn you away from following me. Now, if I was on a plane, I was talking to this nominal minister about that. He thought, oh yeah, this is a heinous, terrible thing. I said, but if you realize this is a lesson for the body of Christ to get rid of all the character flaws, it's a long discussion. But I was trying to see how serious God is for the church to develop the character of Christ. Don't take in any enemies. In this picture, totally destroy any and all pagan influences that will corrupt you. Deuteronomy 20, verse 16, it says, thou shalt save alive nothing that breathes. Now that's pretty powerful. Nothing that breathes. Well, Aaron and Moses die. They leave Joshua in charge. And now, all the guilty adults over this 39-year period who had rebelled at Kadesh Barnea, they're now dead. And Israel's guilt was rolled away. Well, Gilgal means rolled away. And where they crossed Jordan under Joshua, who would lead them into Canaan, into this land flowing with milk and honey. Now, the younger generation, they've been waiting for these 39 years. they've been seeing Israel be cast off. They've seen these ones who have died, who God has killed because they wouldn't follow God. So this younger generation knows how serious God is. So they're going to go into Canaan under Joshua. Now here's the picture. Here's the picture. Israel under Joshua going into Canaan pictures one new creature, each one of you, with the Lord as his head, entering into his own character to destroy the enemies. That's the picture. We're all beheaded. We have Christ as our head, and he's going to help us destroy these character flaws. In the first part of Joshua, it says, wherever you set your foot, you'll be successful. Well, that meant they had to go there. You know, God wasn't saying, well, Joshua didn't say, well, just stay here and we'll bring all the enemies to you. No, they had to hunt them down, just like we have to hunt down all the character flaws in our character, but with Christ as our head, he's going to help us destroy them utterly and totally. That's really our job. We can't do it utterly and totally in every case, but that has to be our desire. So, just as Israel was to slay utterly every man, woman, child, ox, ass, take no prisoners, or the gold or the silver, so we are to destroy all the evil influences in or affecting our characters and take no prisoners. We're not to save the sweetest sin for later, but to destroy everything totally. Well, Israel crosses Jordan, they're circumcised, they partook of the Passover. Gee whiz, that pictured a reconsecration. I think we had something like that earlier this morning. A reconsecration, a rededication. And now they're going to come into the land where now they can, with Joshua as their leader, they can fight the battles against the Canaanites and they can win. Well, we know many of us have studied Jericho in detail. There's a great victory. Then they leave Jericho and they go off to Ai to take Ai, but they lost God's favor because of something that happened in Jericho. So they go to Ai and they fail. Well, in Joshua 7:11, it says, Israel hath sinned. And they have also transgressed my covenant. They've taken the accursed thing. They've put it in among their own stuff. Well, gee whiz, had everybody in Israel sinned? No. There was one man who did, but it was counted. He was part of Israel, and it was counted Israel really as one man, is how the picture is. God says, Israel has sinned. They were treated as a whole, not simply of the one who committed the act, but this sin was on Israel, and God was viewing them as a single unit, just like each one of us as a new creature with Jesus as our head. There can be tendencies in us that we have to kill. We have to kill and get rid of. So what happened? Did God take care of all that? No, he didn't. Israel draws lots. They found Achan. He's the one who coveted the spoils from Jericho and hid them. So Israel takes Achan, the silver, the gold, his sons, his daughters, his asses, his sheep, his tent, everything they have. They stoned them, they burned them, destroyed it. But note carefully, Israel wasn't destroyed, but Achan, who pictured a selfish, fleshly tendency, he was destroyed. Just like we have to go into our character, find the enemies, find something selfish or a bad influence, get rid of it. It's not going to destroy the new creature, but it's going to destroy the fleshly tendency affecting the new creature. Note also that Israel found the offender themselves, and they took responsibility for the necessary action themselves to purge themselves of sin. So we have to take responsibility to purge ourselves. If you judge yourselves, you will not be judged. We have to take that personal responsibility. So as they were learning this personal responsibility for maintaining their relationship with God, just as we as new creatures must take personal responsibility for our relationship with God and discover and purge any selfish tendencies that would take us out of God's favor and prevent us from winning the battles which we must fight and we must win. Well, Israel later took Ai, but they've sent in with greater force, better planning, and they took greater care. Well, brethren, for us, things aren't always quite that simple as new creatures, because our flesh is devious and it will do anything to survive. It will do anything. In Jeremiah 17:9 and 10, Jeremiah 17:9 and 10, the heart of the natural man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, the answer is in the next verse. I, the Lord, search the heart. He'll bring things to our attention, tell us what we have to work on. Hey, there's a problem here. Sometimes we'll have an experience and we think we're doing good. And somebody says something happens, and we react in a really frighteningly bad way, and you say, I didn't know that was in there. So the Lord brings it to our attention and says, hey, there's a problem here. You got to get rid of that. You got to get rid of that attitude so we know what to work on. In the Foes and Besetments of the New Creation on the sixth volume, F601, Brother Russell says, the old heart, the old affections, the selfish disposition, frequently practice deceptions upon the new heart and say in effect, well, now you've reckoned me dead and you've put me out and I am dead as respect what I was, but I'm not the same old heart I was formerly, so you have to give me some consideration. How many times have we found ourselves brought into bondage by the deceitfulness of the old heart? If the old heart, the old mind, the old will can get the new one to make a compromise of truth or duty for the sake of peace, there will be no end of the demands it will make. And the result will be that the new creature would soon, in the interest of peace, be violating the very essence of his covenant with the Lord and be fully submitting himself to the old will. Well, here's an example of this as Israel's going through the land of Canaan. We'll look at the Gibeonites. What happens there? This is in Joshua 9 through 23, and we'll skip around a little bit. Joshua 9, verses 3 through 23. Well, when the Gibeonites heard what had happened in Jericho, these were Hivites. This is one of the specific peoples that they were supposed to destroy utterly, save nothing that breathes. I mean, just lay the place waste, flat to the ground. So the Gibeonites, these Hivites, they heard about Joshua. They knew what had happened in Egypt. They knew about Jericho. They knew about Ai. So they say, well, let's put on old clothes, old shoes, put moldy breads in bags. And they came around a different way. And they come to Israel and they go, boy, we've come from a long way away. And we know you're one God, your God's one true God. No doubt about that. And we've got respect for him. We have respect for him. So please make a league with us. We'll be your servants. So Joshua 9:14, so the men of Israel took and ate some of this moldy bread. So, boy, yeah, that's moldy. You must have come from a long way away. Yeah, of course. So they make a covenant with them. They didn't check with the Lord first. They make a covenant with them. Joshua makes peace, made a covenant and league with them. Well, 3 days later, they find out, oh my word, they're like 6-8 miles away. They're the neighbors. Their people were supposed to destroy utterly, but they already made a league, so they couldn't do that. So in Joshua 9:23, they made them bondmen and hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of God. So what happened? Well, these Hivites, these Gibeonites, these people of the land would not be separated from Israel. And what would happen is this would become one of the most they would be one of the most terrible influences on Israel and cause one of the greatest disasters in Israel's history. Well, this league with the Hivites was contrary to God's ordinance, and there would be a reckoning. God didn't say these things for nothing. Well, in Judges 19 through 21, there's an obscure but very powerful series of events. And these chapters really seem to be an appendix to the book of Judges because they are so reprehensible of what happened. And if you look, Phinehas has a major portion of this. And if these chapters were placed chronologically in Judges, Phinehas would have had to be about 300 years old. So it seems that they recorded it, that they said, well, let's put this at the end. It's kind of embarrassing. Well, let's see what this festering pagan influence of these Hivites, these Gibeonites, did to Israel. Well, in Judges 19, verse 12, and we'll go 12 down through 29 or so. There was this man from Mount Ephraim. He was a Levite. He had a concubine. He was sojourning. And he says, well, let's go over to Gibeah, which is one of these cities of the Benjamites. We're going to go over there and stay overnight on our way. Well, in Judges 19:16, there was an old man, and he was not a Benjamite. He was also from Mount Ephraim. And he sees this Levite and his concubine, and they're going to make their, stay overnight in the street. So this old man says, oh, no. Believe me, you cannot stay in the street. This is not good. So he says, you come into my house, I'll take care of you. Well, in the middle of the night, here's what happens. Some Benjamites knock on the door and they say, bring forth that man that came to your house. Bring him out that we may know him. Just like Sodomites. Where did Benjamin get this idea? Well, from the Hivites that were with them. They're starting to be acting like these Hivites, these pagans. So the man says, well, don't do so wickedly. Here's my daughter. Take her. And then he says, well, take the concubine, but leave the man. He's under my care. So they abuse her all night. In the morning, she's dead on the doorstep. So the Levite takes her, cuts her in 12 pieces, sends her all about Israel. And what he was doing, he was summoning the troops. This is the same thing that Saul did with an oxen. Summon the troops, all Israel. So in Judges 20, verse 1, and all Israel went out, and they gathered together, note, 20, verse 1, they gathered together as one man. Here it is, again, as one man. From Dan to Beersheba, and they rose at one hand and say, we will not any of us go to her tent, neither will we have any of us turn to his house. This shall be the thing we will do. We will go up by lot against Israel. So they decided themselves to purge this great sin from Israel. In Judges 20, verse 12, they sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, hey, don't be so wicked. In Judges 20:13, now therefore deliver us the men, the children of Belial, who are these Benjamites in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and put away evil from, doesn't say from Benjamin, it says put away evil from Israel. Again, Israel was seen as one whole by God. Just as we must fight and destroy any enemy that we find in our flesh, doesn't matter how entrenched, how long it's been festering, no matter how bad it is, once we find it, we got to get rid of it. Doesn't matter the cost. But the children of Benjamin said, no, are you kidding? No, we're going to go out to battle against you, just like our flesh may fight back. And we find something we got to stop, and the flesh says, I'm not stopping. I'm going to fight. So in Judges 20:15, the children of Benjamin, they had 26,000 men that drew sword, and there were 700 chosen men who could sling stones within a hair's breadth. Now, if you're going up against an enemy like that, there will be blood. There will be deaths. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be bloody. But these men of Israel, they were committed. They've got to do this. So the men of Israel were 400,000 men that drew sword. They're all men of war. They go up to the tabernacle. They ask counsel of God, and God says, "Yes, you're all going to go up. Judah's going to go up first." So they go up. The next day, and in Judges 20:21, there were 22,000 men of Israel who were killed. No mention of any casualties of Benjamin. 22,000 men of Israel have now died. So that night, the children of Israel, they go up before the Lord. They're weeping because they've lost their brothers, their sons, their fathers. And they're saying, "Oh my word, what a cost! Should we go up again?" And the Lord said, "You go up again." So they went up again the next day. And that next day, they're fighting against Benjamin, and 18,000 of Israel are slain. No mention of any of Benjamin's casualties. They go up to the house of God again. They're weeping again. Their sons, their fathers, their brothers, they're lying dead on the ground because they're trying to rid Israel of this terrible sin. What should we do? Shall we go out again? And the Lord said, "You go up again. But this time, I'm going to give Benjamin into your hand because I see your resolve. I see you're willing to pay any price to get rid of this sin in Israel. And you're going to be successful now." Just like when we see something bad in our character that's been festering and we're committed to get rid of it, and we don't care how high the cost is, and we're willing to pay that cost to get rid of it, the Lord says, "I will bless you. You will be successful." So they go out. They destroyed 25,000 men. Only 600 of Benjamin were left. They were saved. Interesting other things in Judges 21. But this cost of the sin, this terrible influence that was allowed to fester, it cost the death of 99% of the tribe of Benjamin. Because out of 26,000 men, only 600 were left. Well, all these men had children, had wives and children. So virtually all of Benjamin was destroyed. 40,000 of these 400,000 of Israel were destroyed. Well, that was 10%. That's the definition of decimating, when 10% are dead. That was the cost to Israel. God blessed it because they were willing to pay any price. This, by the way, is why Benjamin became the smallest tribe, because 99% of them were killed. So, brethren, if we have become prey to a deceptive fallen influence, whether it's outwardly good or outwardly bad, and we find that we have made a deal with it, we must eventually come to our senses and act. We might have to pay a high price to return to God's favor, but it can be done, and it must be done to the extent of our ability. Jesus talked about this. In Matthew 5:30, he says, "And if thy right hand offend thee," oh, well, that's okay. That's okay. No, he said, "If thy right hand offend thee, cut it off." Now, that would be a high price, but it's worth it for the new creature. "If thy eye offend thee, pluck it out." Doesn't matter what the cost. You've made a covenant with Jehovah, you have to keep it. Even if you find that you've done something really wrong, you get rid of it. You get rid of it. Our last example is with the decree of Cyrus in 536. In 536, well, Zerubbabel led about 52,000 of Israel back to Jerusalem. They began to rebuild the temple, and started with the altar, but very soon after the foundation was laid, in Ezra 4:1, these adversaries of Judah, the people of the land, they came to Zerubbabel and said, well, hey, let us build with you. Now, these were really the Samaritans, who would become the Samaritans later. And they were intermixed Israelites with Assyrians who had been taken captive hundreds of years earlier. Well, they said, we seek your God as you do, and we're gonna we do a sacrifice to him. But Zerubbabel and Joshua said, you have nothing to do with this. We're going to build the house of our God. So these people of the land, they sent letters to the king, and that stopped the work for 20 years. So they were getting defocused. There was idleness. Well, later Zerubbabel does resume the work, and Artaxerxes eventually sends this letter with Ezra, sends Ezra back to Jerusalem. And what does Ezra find? Now, this is after they've come back from Babylonian captivity. In Ezra 9:1 and 2, he says, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the land, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, all the ones that God had talked about. They're taking them in again. He said in Ezra 9:2, for they have taken their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of the land. Yea, and even the princes and the rulers have been the chief in this trespass. In Ezra 9:6, he says, oh my God, I'm ashamed and blush to lift my face to these. Ezra's saying, I can't even pray to you. I can't even lift my face. I am so embarrassed. This is the whole reason why we were taken from the land, all this idolatry. And after 70 years in this hard lesson, my word, they're repeating it again. It's like, I can't believe it. I can't lift my face unto you, for our iniquities are increased over our head, and our trespass is grown up unto the heavens. O Lord God Israel, thou art righteous, you have delivered us, but we cannot stand before thee because of this. He was finally seeing, he was an objective person who's coming in and seeing what they're doing. The others didn't really get it. Well, in Ezra 10:1, there assembled unto him others in Israel. A whole bunch of people are gathering Ezra as he's down on the ground, praying to God, and he's so upset. Well, in Ezra 10:2, this is the title of this talk, Yet Now There is Hope. Did I say the title earlier? Maybe I didn't. The whole talk is called Yet Now There is Hope in Israel. Sorry about that. Yet now there is hope in Israel. It's not about the regathering of Israel. It's about what Shechaniah is saying here. And Shechaniah, his name means God dwells. He's the son of Jehiel, which means God lives. He answers Ezra. He says, we have trespassed against our God and have taken strange wives of the people of the land. Yes, we've done it. We see it now. But then he says, yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing. In Ezra 10:3, he says, now, therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and their children. It doesn't mean they're just going to kill them. It's just saying, we can't live with them anymore. We can have them in our homes. We'll still support them, I would imagine. But they're a terrible influence. And Ezra stood up and said, ye have transgressed, you've taken strange wives. Therefore make confession and separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the strange wives. And then all the congregation answered and said, as thou hast said, we must too. Now, brethren, just think of that. Wives, children, there's a terrible cost. Ones that they love, their own children. They're going to have to separate themselves to do God's will. They remembered God's commandment They admitted their guilt and they vowed to undo the damage that had been done at great personal cost to them. Their wives, their children would be put away. Well, we must also purge any influence that detracts from our relationship with God, whether good or bad. Influences are invisible things. They may be hard to recognize or admit. They flow into us and they change us. That's why they're called influences. We may think that we won't be affected. Well, about 14 years ago, when this lesson was becoming apparent to me, I had a nice experience, which I'd like to really, sometimes the Lord hits me over the head with a 2x4. Well, we have arborvitae bushes all around our backyard. They're about 15 feet tall. And in the corner, there was not an arborvitae, but it was like a cedar bush. Well, it was so overgrown with arborvitae, it had died. And I thought, this is ugly. I should take this out. So I got out a ladder. I go out and put it up against the bush. I'm clipping off the branches, pulling them out. Sister Karen's with me. We're out there doing this on a nice sunny day. And pretty soon I'm 5-6 feet off the ground, and this is a cedar bush. And there are all of a sudden in the middle of this bush, there are leaves all around me. Leaves! What is this? Well, I looked a little closer, and it was poison ivy. Oh. Well, I thought, that's no problem. I'm immune to poison ivy. I always have. I've never gotten poison ivy. No problem. But I turned around and I said, Sister Karen, sweetheart, oh, wow, hey, stop right here, go wash off, put on gloves, because you're just this weak woman, but I'm this big, strong guy who's immune to all this stuff. So she did. And so I'm pulling these things out, and these vines are going over my arms and my legs. I'm wearing shorts and t-shirt, and no problem. Well, the next day, itch. The day after that, itch. The day after that, itch. Doctor, steroids, and I spent the next 3 weeks whimpering on the couch, waiting for, big red welts. It was just waiting for my immune system and the poison ivy to finally have do something. What a great lesson. Was I immune? No. Well, brethren, let's err on the safe side and not be presumptuous or even tempt God, thinking that we are immune to new creature poison. Paul said to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:20 and 21, in any great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and of earth, some to honor and some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself, which we must do, from these he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use. In Malachi 3:3, the returned Lord, he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. Silver pictures truth. He returns, he purifies all these errors, gives meat in due season to the household of faith, so we have this pure truth. And he shall use that to purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. Well, that purging really is a lifelong thing, and the final offering is at the end of our course. End of our course. Well, in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. So when we have a realization of sins, of things we've done which are wrong, this should lead to contrition. And contrition, it's not, oh gee, I'm really sorry. But if contrition, if it's sincere, it should lead to action. Doctrine is what you do. Doctrine, it's what you do. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And when he leads, we must follow. We must follow. As far in the Psalm 103:12, as far as the east is from the west, I don't know if I'm pointing to east and west here. As far as the east is from the west, so far he has put our transgressions from us. But we have to remove ourselves from any influences which motivate more transgressions. We have to do that. Every parent knows this. What influences are the best for your children? We talked about that. Well, brethren, we are tending our embryo new creature, which is growing and developing. Let's give it the best influences. God provides the very best environment for this new creature, the womb of the Sarah covenant, talked about in Galatians chapter 4. So train up a child, Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child, train up your new creature in a way that it should go, and when he is old, when he is about ready to be finished, he will not depart foot from it, and make the calling election sure. Our new creature is the most precious and valuable child that we will ever care for. We must give it the best. If we have failed in the past along any of these lines we've talked about, let us not lose heart, let us not declare defeat. For a just man, in Proverbs 24:16, for a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. And as Shechaniah said 2,500 years ago, yet now there is hope in Israel. And may the Lord add his blessing.